Hello and welcome to Behind the Screen. I am JM, and this is a show where we hang out and we talk about games. We talk about role-playing games, board games, card games, miniature games, and things that are beautiful. And that's why we're here today. We're talking about beauty in gaming and what it inoculates, what it cures, what it helps us with. And today we're talking about materialism and consumerism. You're like, JM, why are we talking about this stuff? It could be boring to you. It could be sad. It could be any number of things. But I think it's important to kind of look at why we do gaming and why gaming is such a unique hobby. It pushes back against these ideas that we're inundated with every day. So let's take a look at materialism. So in a lot of cases, materialism will say there's several ways to define materialism. Some will take a metaphysical view of it, which says, hey, only the material world matters and is real. There's no such thing as anything beyond a materialistic point of view. And if that's what you believe, that's fine. But I think that there are still, even if you don't believe in a supernatural reality to the world like I do and others do, I do think that it's hard to just write everything off as strictly chemical processes, some of our parts, that sort of thing. Consciousness itself is elusive and strangely defiant of the idea that it's just a material based process. And it is because I'm a material girl, John. Yeah, I think it's a good way to look at it. So what is interesting about role-playing games is that the default assumption for most role-playing games is a inherent antithetical materialist worldview. Take Dungeons and Dragons. Clerics exist, wizards exist, gods exist, different planes of realities exist. The dead can come back either bodily as zombies or other forms of undead, or can come back as spirits. Call of Cthulhu postulates there are things outside of our reality trying to break in. Deadlands talks about the hunting grounds. Rifts gives us a multitude of dimensions and a world where magic is real. This idea that in our hobbies, in our gaming, we inherently push back against the idea of a strictly mechanistic, materialistic worldview. I think that's one of the reasons that Greg Stafford said that they're so mythological. We are able to take kind of our modern view of things and strip it away and scrape it away for a while, like frost off a windshield. And at least for a little bit, engage with something a little bit more mythological, a little bit more supernatural. And I think that a lot of our debates online kind of come back to a dissonance between kind of the inherent mythological truth of role-playing games and sort of a modern materialist view of role-playing games. Basically, we're going to talk about orcs. There's some debate, are orcs inherently evil creatures that serve no purpose in a campaign other than to be there to take their stuff and slaughter them because they are a living embodiment of chaos and evil? Or is that biological essentialism? That no creature should be defined by its biological attributes solely, and that to do so is finish that sentence however you like. And I think that is a fight between the inherent mythological nature of a game and our modern materialist view. And yes, Padre brings up a good point. In Tolkienian fantasy, orcs are evil incarnate. In early Dungeons and Dragons, the only reason you could have good orcs were half orcs because they had a human metaphysical connection that gave them the ability of free will. The orc race was created by Grumsh, a god of evil and destruction, to be his incarnate army in the world. But you go to World of Warcraft or Palladium Fantasy, and you have the Orc Empire, and you know what? The orcs are just trying to make their way in the world. They're just, reskinned humans with slightly different traits. Oh, Padre, we can open up a can of worms there. The elves believe that the orcs in Middle-earth are corrupted elves because everything in the Silmarillion is from the elvish point of view. However, Tolkien wrestled with several other, as I'm sure you know, other origins for the orcs. But corrupted elves or not, they serve as demon incarnate in the Silmarillion and in the Lord of the Rings. They are, in many cases, the actual face of evil. Now, whichever one you want for your campaign world is fine. I'm not here telling you how to run your campaign. But let's look at another monster. The Brew in Glorantha fit the same role as the orc in Tolkien or early Dungeons and Dragons. A completely irredeemable, chaotic race breeding for one purpose, which is the end of the age of men. And I think that's where the dissonance comes in. Because when I talk about orcs, that's where I'm coming from. I'm coming from, listen, creatures like this are incarnate evil. There is no redeeming with them. There is no negotiating with them. There is the destruction of evil. And when people are like, well, that's biological essentialism, I'm like, don't bring your modern mindset into my mythological game. Now, if you want to do that, that's fine. Please hear me. I'm not telling you how to run your games. I'm just telling you how I run my games. In Jackals, there's no such thing as a good Decon. Because the only good Decon is a dead Decon. Because they are evil incarnate. So if you find yourself wrestling with that, take a step back. Which path do you want to take? Do you want to apply a more modern mindset to your campaign setting? Which is fine. A lot of people do. It's sort of the main thrust of the modern Dungeons and Dragons. Or do you want to take a more mythological view? And that's fine too. I think we all would be better if we just said, hey, you can play your game the way you want to play it, and I'll play my game the way I want to, and stop yelling at each other, in workspace. On the internet. Kind of feel they're the same thing. Role-playing games allow us to go back to a time of fairy tales, a time of mythology, a time where good is good and evil is evil, and yes, by those rules and logic, that means that good and evil bear physical marks on our body. But the other thing that goes with materialistic worldview, sometimes hand in hand, but not always. I know a lot of great materialists who I thoroughly enjoy as people and love to hang out with. And we can talk about these things, and at the end of the day, they're like, I disagree with you. And I'm like, I disagree with you. And you know what? That used to be the definition of the word tolerance, that we could disagree on points and still see the value in having friends and the value of them in a human being. That word is drifted from that definition. But is consumerism. And consumerism is, we're not going to get into like all of the economic points of this, but consumerism is basically that my value in society is based off what I purchase and consume. Because here's the truth of the matter. In a postmodern society, especially on social media isn't the product. You, my friend, are the product. Corporations are looking for ways to engage with you, to get you to consume while they produce the next thing. I've heard it said several times on the internet, right? A lot of the streaming companies just kind of expect you to consume this show while waiting for next show to consume, or consume this movie while waiting for... It's a lot. And here's the great thing about role-playing games. They never become obsolete. You aren't required to purchase anything more than you need. And in fact, the less you have, the more creative you are, and the more of that game that you yourself own. There's a lot of great games that come everything you need in one book. Basically every Palladium role-playing game. Savage Worlds. Requires the core rule book and some other things. But, right, think about, even if you're playing a game that has 3 core books, such as Dungeons and Dragons, at $50 a pop, you pay $150 for that once. And you don't need to buy another book for the rest of your life, despite what they may tell you. You can run those same 3 books forever. And the more you play, the cheaper those books become. When we go to see a movie, we're spending anywhere between $10 and $20 in some cases, maybe even more depending on where you live, for, call it 2.5 hours worth of entertainment. So if we spent $20 and it's 2 hours of entertainment, that was $10 an hour. Now, if we spend $150 on Dungeons and Dragons books and we play one 4-hour D&D session, what is that? 75, 37.5 for the GM. Not, spread it around the table, it gets even less. But if we play every week for a year, I'm talking about pennies per book. And just because a game comes out with a new edition, there is nothing that says you have to go out and buy it. It's not like a video game where I have to buy a new console or rebuild my computer or wait for the game to come out in a new version that will run on my machine because the previous game came out so long ago that it just... Role-playing games are immune to this. I have 4 shelves of 2nd edition Dungeons and Dragons that I use all the time. I have an entire shelf of 1st edition Dungeons and Dragons. I have multiple shelves of Savage Worlds down here. And while yes, I am a guppy and want to consume and read all of the role-playing games I can, if tomorrow I had to pick one and only run that for the rest of my life, it would be tough, but it would be completely doable. There is no other hobby that is as consumer-proof as role-playing games. And I think that's where we're seeing a lot of discussion around going forward in the hobby. I think the people in charge know this. They recognize this. And they're looking for ways to force us to move away and this anti-consumer mindset that kind of threads its way through kind of the inherent nature of role-playing games. If they can get us to buy into certain systems and certain mechanics and certain ways of interacting with our hobby, they can get us on the hook for a subscription. Well, then they won. The giant's inside the gates, my friend, and suddenly your game is no longer as real, in my opinion. Here's the thing about my two ebooks, for example, or hell, here's the truth about my Suede book. Yes, there are new printings of this. This book here, I think, is the 4th printing, and I've got 5th printing that now have slick bookmarks in them. And these are incremental changes, right? They're incorporating the errata. There might be a little bit of change back and forth, but here's the thing. I can play with my 4th printing book of Suede, no issues, even if you come with a 5th printing. Because this book is real. It's in my hands. I've got I've got my 2nd edition books, and they're locked in time, if you will. The problem with digital only materials is twofold. One, what if, and we've seen this happen, what if something suddenly no longer conforms to the prevalent view of society? You've purchased it, it's yours, but the company decides to go and remove things from it, change things from it. We've seen it in television shows, we've seen it in movies, we've seen it in games. If you don't believe me, go check out some of the articles written about the controversy of the Hadozi and the Spelljammer book. Spelljammer book came out, there was something that was controversial in it, and going forward, all of the digital copies have been changed. You'd never know that something had happened, except if you have that first printing of the book. The second thing is the walled garden mentality. If they can get you to buy in to their systems and their subscriptions, if you suddenly go, I don't want to pay for this anymore, do you have access to it? We just had a controversy of people who had purchased the previous versions of things on D&D Beyond suddenly not having access to them, but you could import it through this convoluted way, and all I see is a way to force consumerism on our hobby. I rail against that. Because that ephemeral digital hyper-reality draws us further away from the things that engage me about role-playing games, the things that are physical, the things that draw me together, the things that focus my mind on culture, community, friends, redemption, heroism. So, all that to say, if you play with digital assets, if you play with digital games, if you play with VTTs, I do too. I just think that we should maybe be a little more discerning in how we're doing it, so that we don't find the giants inside the walls of our games. All right, I had a lot going on in that episode, so I'm going to scroll back up here and look at last I left off. Yes, he did wrestle with the origins of Galadriel, Padre. Oh, are we referencing here some Leaf by Nigel? It's a great story, one of my favorite. John Doom, social media sites are like a poker game. If you're there for 30 minutes and you can't find the patsy. Yes, we are. Tink, have a Benny. We're all beasts of consumption slouching toward TTRPG tables to be born. James, I do too, man. The 1E modules, and here's the other thing. If you like fantasy, I don't care what game you're playing, go check out the Hyperborea modules. For the price, there are no better modules on the planet being produced right now. These things I bought, I think I've mentioned this before. I did the Anthropophagy of Zimbala, and we got like 14 weeks of gameplay of 3 hours a week out of it. It was like $19.99 or $25, but you got a city and you got a wilderness map and you got multiple dungeons and you got multiple plot threads. Those are the modules that I keep going back to. I still go back to my 2E modules. Rod of Seven Parts, Night Below, Axe of the Dwarvish Lords. You know, I love Juicer Uprising and the Coalition, the Siege on Tolkien from Palladium, the Undying War from Castles and Crusades. There are still people who are producing amazing modules. I appreciate that the Crow Mother was your nightmare fuel for last night. It was awesome. And James, that's fine. Like, I know a lot of people who Wizards has managed to burn a lot of bridges over the last couple of years. And I think part of the problem is, as gamers, lots of people get riled up online about the decisions that Hasbro makes and WotC makes and D&D makes. And I think all that proves to me is every time I see one of these conflicts erupt online, I'm like, it's because Dungeons and Dragons means so much to so many of us. And that's really where the conflict is that for a lot of us, what Dungeons and Dragons means here and here isn't what we see being carried forward. And here's the beautiful part of TTRPGs. That's fine. I get to play the Dungeons and Dragons that I like with no skin off my nose towards anyone else. Yes, Padre, our digital books do take up less space, and that's why I always recommend offloading all of your digital media onto an external drive, because when DriveThruRPG first came out, they had a bunch of second edition PDFs, including the Birthright box set, which I purchased. And then for a very long time, those things were unavailable to me, even though I gave DriveThru money because they lost the license or something else happened. And I was very angry about it. Oh man, Knights, I would play in a Dragon Mountain Suede game in a heartbeat. Man, it's just, you guys are always just on top of it. Well, that's it for today. Thank you guys so much for journeying with me. The last episode of this series will be on Tuesday. We're going to talk about RPGs as Mythic renewal, and I'm very excited to end on a positive note. And then next Thursday, I'm going to be reviewing Necessary Evil, the new old box set for Suede, for Savage Worlds. I adore Necessary Evil as a setting. It does have this great GM screen that came with it. Oh, and what's this? It also came with an adventure, The Return of Dr. Destruction, a 32-page adventure by J.M. DeFoe. So I am a little biased, and I'll point that out when we talk about it next week. Tonight, I'm on Savage Universe on the PEG channel, but I am not the host. I am the interviewee, because I just released a adventure for Savage Saturday Cinema called The Rites of Spring and Madness, and I get to talk about it. Christopher Landauer, the estimable other host of the PEG streaming, will be on there with me, and we're going to get to talk about that adventure. He's going to interview me, so who knows what we'll talk about. And then this Saturday, as promised, Exploring Glorantha, we will wrap up our Second Age uh, viewing because, sorry, we had to postpone it from last week, but you know, health issues always come first. So, guys, thank you so much for this, hanging out with me while we talk about this. I love doing these shows. I love interacting with you all. And if you haven't joined either the membership on YouTube or on Patreon, please consider go doing so. As John Doom pointed out, we have a great Discord community. So, until next time, stay safe, stay healthy, stay gaming. I am JM. This has been Behind the Screen, and I will talk with you guys all on Tuesday. Until then, have a good one.